Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and now we'll review Season 6 of Star Trek TNG, starting with the two-parter episode Time's Arrow, which I started to talk about in my previous review. And I think this might be one of the best time travel episodes in the entire series. It starts out as a mystery, which is something I love in the show, as I often say. All kinds of episodes in which you don't know what's going on at first, and so they find it as a severed head in a cave back on Earth, and that's why they recall the Enterprise there, and then they find out that at some point in the future he's going to be transported into the past, 500 years in the past, where his head will be severed. And later on in part 1, that's exactly what happens. He gets teleported to the past, to the 19th century, where he meets Mark Twain and the younger Guinan, who was back on Earth at the time. Also Jack London and Gul Dukat in the poker game, which I guess Data cheated. They let him deal the cards, and so I guess he arranged all the cards directly, which I guess when he played with the Enterprise crew he never did that, he never cheated, but here he does cheat because it's for the greater good, to save humanity, so that's why he cheats and wins all their money, and that's how he can pay for the hotel. And then he tracks down Guinan, and then realizes that's not his Guinan, that's the Guinan in the past, and Mark Twain overhears him and finds out about the people from the future and all of that. So a lot of very funny moments and just a fun adventure overall. It's a fun episode. Mark Twain is hilarious, the way he sneaks around to try to find out what Data is doing and all of that. And in part 2, the rest of the crew also joined Data in the past. It's kind of funny how all the major characters all went into the past. So who is in charge of the Enterprise? The Enterprise is in orbit of that planet with the hostile aliens, and they don't leave anyone important in charge. It's kind of strange. I guess Barclay is in charge, or Nurse Ogawa, or maybe Ensign Rowe, or whoever. Anyway, so back in the past, there's a lot of funny scenes, like that scene of Picard not knowing how to pay for that hotel stay, so he kind of tricks that lady who runs the place by pretending they're actors and stuff. A lot of funny moments, and so this was a very entertaining episode, first of all, and secondly, the time travel itself makes perfect sense in the end. It's a perfect loop. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Data's head is severed, but then they retouch it later in the future, and I guess he didn't suffer any damage from the time passage of 500 years because it's working perfectly in the future, and Picard left a message inside it to help them out, and Mark Twain goes with them to the future, and then he's sent back because someone needs to go back. And so in the end of the day, everything is resolved perfectly. They defeat those evil aliens, which that was a little bit of a missed opportunity because we didn't really know a lot about those aliens, and we never saw them again in any other Star Trek show. And I thought they were kind of creepy and interesting, but they kind of easily defeated them, destroyed them, and that's it. So that was a little bit disappointing, in my opinion. But the overall story is good and solid and funny, very entertaining, and it makes perfect logical sense in the end, at least as its own standalone story. It's a little bit problematic when you think about the whole series and all the other time travel stories, because what happened when the different timeline was created in yesterday's Enterprise, the one that Guinan noticed is different. So in that timeline, Picard would not have come back to the past, or if he would be kind of a different Picard, and so would things happen differently in that timeline. So how exactly can it be a perfect loop here if we know that different timelines get created from different time travel incidents? It doesn't really make sense. However, maybe it can be used to explain how Guinan knew the timeline changed. We see in this episode that Picard takes care of her when she was injured in the past, so maybe in between scenes, maybe he told her about the future, maybe he told her about the Federation, maybe he said the Federation is at peace, and she remembered that, and then when she reaches the time of the Enterprise, when she's on the Enterprise, and suddenly she realizes it's a war with the Klingons, which is not supposed to be happening, maybe that explains how she knew in that episode in yesterday's Enterprise, how she knew the timeline changed, because it doesn't fit what Picard told her when he was in the past. Or maybe because she was in the nexus in between, and that exists beyond linear time, and because of that maybe she saw some of the future. And so we can use all of those events to kind of explain away her powers, and not just say that it's an ability of her people, which I always thought was a lame excuse. So this episode is one of those things that can retroactively explain away how she knew the timeline changed, and I like that. So all in all, a very entertaining two-parter. I cannot say it's excellent, but it's very entertaining. One of the best time travel stories in all of Star Trek, in my opinion. So moving on, the next episode is called Realm of Fear, in which we find out that Barclay is terrified of being transported, and yet for a mission he has to go on a different ship, and the transporter is working differently, so he has to face his fear, and I like that. I love the character of Barclay, because he feels like a real person with real problems. He has all kinds of phobias, he's shy, he's insecure, he has the transporter phobia, In the end of the episode, apparently he has a spider phobia. So he's a funny character and also interesting. It's also, you're kind of rooting for him because he needs to overcome problems. And also in this episode, he becomes kind of a paranoid because he thinks that he became sick from the transporter. And in the end of the episode, he saves the people from that other ship who kind of stored themselves in the transporter beam. And he's the one who figured it out. Also, that's also something I like in Barclay, that he's a smart and clever character. He often figures out things that others cannot. So despite all his flaws, he's still kind of a brilliant person. And he saves a bunch of people, and he has to overcome his fear to do it. And that's great. That's a great idea. Also, a lot of funny moments in this episode when he was behaving like a paranoid and all of that. So that was funny. So overall, a very good episode in my opinion, with some creepy scenes and also like a mystery story, because we don't know, we the audience also are not sure if he really saw what he saw or if it's all in his mind. We also don't know the answer till the end, and so that makes it very kind of mysterious and interesting. Also, it's the only episode in which we see someone's point of view when he was being transported. We never saw that in all the other Star Trek episodes and movies. We never saw that again, and that's something very interesting, and this is the only example of that. And also that creepy stuff he saw while being transported was interesting. And so overall, I like this episode. And the next one is called Man of the People, which is about a man who came from a ship which I think was called the Dorian. And that's probably not by coincidence. If you remember the book The Portrait of Dorian Gray, it was about someone who transfers his negative emotions to his own portrait, and that way he can stay young while the painting gets older and disgusting and all of that, as if he's transferring all his negativity to that painting which is linked to him. And so probably that's why they call that ship the Dorian, because the person who came from that ship has a similar kind of ability. He's able to transfer his negative emotions to other people, and then they grow old fast and die. So he's exploiting people in that way, but he claims it's for the greater good, because thanks to this he's able to do his job as an ambassador and achieve peace between planets and stuff like that. It's kind of funny how many times in this series we have this kind of character of some kind of amazing ambassador with some strange abilities. It's kind of funny how many times we had that. We had that mute ambassador in one of the first seasons, and he was talking through other people telepathically. Then we had that Trill ambassador who turned out to be a parasite, and then he moved into Riker's body to continue doing his job. And now we have this guy who transfers his negative emotions to other people so that he can do his job as an ambassador. Like, being an ambassador is not something so amazing that you would have to have abilities to do it. I mean, Picard is a pretty good ambassador in many episodes, so why would all these ambassadors need all these special gifts and all of that? So it's kind of funny how many times that happened in the show. So anyway, he does the same thing to Troy. He transfers his negativity to Troy, and then Troy becomes kind of evil, and then she grows older. And there are a few very funny scenes of Troy kind of abusing people and stuff like that. So that was the highlight of the episode, because the main story is not really that good, not really that interesting, not even really a science fiction idea. It's more like a fantasy stuff, and I didn't like that main villain. He wasn't scary. Then Troy grows older, and then they have to kill her in order to release her, and then they revive her, and then she grows magically younger again. All kinds of ridiculous stuff like that. So overall, I would say this is a below average episode, even though it had a few very good scenes, very entertaining scenes. But overall, this episode was not really in my taste, and so I don't really like it that much. So it's below average in my opinion. And the next episode is called Relics, in which Scotty appears from the original series. They find him trapped in a transporter loop because he put himself there to store himself. I guess kind of similar to what happened 2 episodes before with those people that Barclay rescued. So apparently it's possible to store yourself in a transporter, and that way you don't grow old, and it's better than cryogenics, I guess. And Scotty being on the ship is a lot of fun. They put him together with Geordi because they were both chief engineers, and he visits the holodeck to see his old ship, and Picard joins him, and a lot of very good moments, some funny moments with Scotty, and also the Dyson Sphere was in this episode, and I think that's a very interesting science fiction idea, so I loved seeing that. Too bad it never appeared again, and nothing like that ever was shown again in any of the shows. I guess there were all kinds of structures like those spheres in Enterprise, but they had no relations to the Dyson Sphere, which apparently was abandoned because the star inside was unstable. And I think the Dyson Sphere is such a fascinating idea. They could really do a whole series just about that idea. Like, imagine the surface area of the Dyson Sphere. That's like millions of planets on the inside, and it's always daytime inside there, and there's so much stuff you could do with that idea. You could explore the Dyson Sphere. It's like exploring 200 million planets at the same time. That's like crazy amazing. So I wish they would have done like one follow-up episode maybe later or something. So It's kind of a missed potential. So I love the idea of the Dyson Sphere, but it was so quickly shown and they didn't really explore it. They didn't find anything inside. They just got trapped there, and then Scotty and Jordi saved them from the inside. They opened that gate, allowed them to go through. There's a slight continuity mistake in the end when they managed to beam them through the shields before they blew up their ship, but I guess maybe because their shields were so weak, that made it possible. It was also an older ship, so we know that it is possible. If you know the frequency, then you can beam through, so I can excuse away that little mistake in the end. And the special effects were pretty good. All those shots of the Dyson Sphere from the inside, that looked amazing. And ideas like that, that's what makes science fiction so interesting. I wish we would have seen more stuff like that in Star Trek and in science fiction in general. All kinds of large-scale epic ideas of stuff that higher civilizations would be able to do out in space. I would love to see more stuff like that. But most of the episode was about Scotty and the fact that he's old and out of date and he feels useless and all of that. So that was interesting, I guess, but my favorite bits were about the Dyson Sphere itself because I think it's fascinating. So overall a good episode in my opinion. And the next episode is called Schisms, and I love this episode. Once again, kind of a mystery episode in which you don't know what's really going on at first, all kinds of strange stuff happening. And it turns out that some aliens from a different dimension, from some subspace realm, were kidnapping members of the crew to do experiments on them and then give them back. And it's kind of like the UFO abduction phenomenon, the same kind of stories, that they get paralyzed, they're unable to move, they get abused by these aliens, and then they show up back in their room. So it had a lot of creepy moments, and those aliens and their ship was kind of creepy. Actually, no, the aliens themselves are not creepy, but when Riker was kind of describing that in the holodeck, him and a few others were trying to remember what happened to them, and they found themselves in that creepy room with the strange sounds. That's probably maybe the most creepy scene in the whole show. The scene of them constructing that torture room in the holodeck, which they experienced. That was very creepy, the way the music worked and everything. I remember this is one of the most creepy scenes in the entire show, so I loved it. And also there were some funny scenes with Data. I think this is the episode in which she was reading that poem to Spot. So overall a very good episode, one of my favorites from this season. A lot of very good stuff. And the next episode is called Shahrukh You, in which Q appears once again, and it's kind of strange how Picard never asked him what happened with Vash, because the last time we saw Q, he took Vash with him on some kind of journey, and he shows up now, but Picard never asks about Vash, so that's kind of funny. Anyway, the episode is about some young woman who turns out that she's a Q but didn't know it, and her powers begin to manifest, and then our Q shows up to figure out what to do with her and stuff like that. Pretty entertaining episode, a lot of funny scenes of Q and the young Q kind of playing games on the ship and stuff like that. Also, that woman who played Amanda, I think, it's my personal opinion, she's probably one of the prettiest women I've seen on Star Trek, and her character also is very nice and lovely and all of that. And it was funny how she was toying with her powers, and Q turns Beverly into a dog at one point and stuff like that. So a lot of funny stuff with the Q is always fun. And in the end of the episode, Picard delivers some kind of morality speech, and then Q tells him the only reason he comes there is to listen to these wonderful speeches. So anyway, a very good episode in my opinion. And the next episode is called Rascals, in which some of the crew turn into children, including Picard. And the young Picard is played by the same boy who played his nephew, which I think works perfectly. It makes sense for him to look so similar because it's family. And he was great doing an imitation of Picard, pulling his shirt down and some of that. Not perfect, but pretty good imitation. The other ones were fine as well. All the kids were fine in this episode in my opinion. I have no complaints. And as this happened, the Ferengi took over the ship, and then these kids have to basically free the ship from the Ferengis. So it's a pretty comedic episode, and I think we should look at it that way. Don't try to look at it logically and all of that. It wouldn't work. And there were a lot of funny scenes, like that little Keiko O'Brien still abusing O'Brien even though she's now a girl. She's still being bossy toward O'Brien. And the next one is called A Fistful of Death, which is a holodeck episode in which Worf and Troy and Alexander are trapped in the holodeck, and Data was doing some kind of experiment connecting his brain to the computer, and then all the characters in the holodeck became Data with all his strengths and abilities, and then Worf had to somehow beat Data in the holodeck. So it was an entertaining setup, and also the real Data on the ship was also behaving strangely because some of the program infected him, and so he was behaving strangely. So it was once again an opportunity for Brent Spiner to play around and do be unusual and all that stuff, which is always fun. And all the stuff inside the holodeck was basically a western, so I guess it was fun for a one-time thing. And the best part is definitely Brent Spiner. All the characters he played inside the holodeck, a lot of that was pretty funny. So overall, I think it's a pretty good episode. And the next one is called The Quality of Life, which was about those little droid robots who turned out to be sentient, and then Data tries to protect their rights, and he prevents them from being destroyed, even at the cost of risking the life of Picard and other people, which was kind of strange. I mean, it puts Data into that kind of gray area of morality. Would he really be willing to sacrifice his friends who he knew for years for these potential sentient robots? I mean, what would he have done if not for that easy solution in the end? In the end, one of those robots decided to help out and to sacrifice itself. But if not for that, would that really let Picard and Geordi die because of this? It seems a little bit fishy to me because, a robot can be simply rebuilt. You have the specs, you can simply build another robot like that. A human being is not as easily replicated, so I would still kind of pick to save the human, I think, in such a situation. And of course, Data himself is not a human, so maybe he sympathizes more with the machines. But it's kind of strange how, in the end of the day, he wasn't really punished for what he did. I mean, he disobeyed orders, he risked the life of fellow officers, but because he did it for supposedly a moral reason, then Picard just forgives him in the end. It's kind of fishy, so I don't know. I think this is a below average episode. It had some interesting ideas, but not really done that well. And it's another example of a technology being introduced to the show and then totally forgotten about. So whatever happened with those robots? Why didn't we see any other robots like that ever again in all of Star Trek? Why are they not using robots all the time if they have this technology? Only in Star Trek Discovery recently we saw that there are all kinds of cleaning droids and stuff like that, but we never saw that in all the other shows, and I kind of wonder why. I actually think there should have been more robots in the show, and maybe they should have said there is some kind of limitation on robotics, so that because of the risk involved, especially in Star Trek Discovery, they had that potential to explain away the lack of robots in the future by saying that maybe because of that evil AI that tried to take over, maybe because of that all AI was heavily restricted except for some exceptions like Data and these robots, I guess. But they should have somehow explained that away in Star Trek. Why don't they have more robots? And so this episode kind of brings all these questions up, and it makes even less sense with this episode, and so it's a bit strange. And the next episode is Chain of Command, part 1 and 2. And this was a very, very good episode, even though it was pretty dark at times, maybe the darkest episode. All those scenes of Picard being tortured, probably some of the darkest stuff in all of Star Trek. And meanwhile, Captain Jellicoe gets command of the Enterprise instead of him, and he's a much tougher captain. He demands much more discipline. He's kind of arrogant, kind of not evil, but he's much more unpleasant person compared to Picard. But because he deals with the Cardassians in these episodes, it's kind of the right person for the right place. So it's a little bit strange how this episode makes us kind of hate him, but at the same time we can appreciate that he was being kind of professional and he managed to do what he needed to do, in some ways maybe even better than Picard would have. Because you need some aggressiveness when you deal with bad guys like the Cardassians, then maybe it's a good thing to have someone like Jellicoe to kind of push against them. And so it's very interesting, this duality of hating and appreciating this guy at the same time. And maybe I'll talk about that later in a separate video, but I think he's a very interesting character. It's too bad we didn't see him again in Star Trek. And this actor is great. He played a lot of villains in famous movies like RoboCop, Total Recall, Stargate SG-1, and he's a very fun actor. And here he's kind of annoying, but also you kind of like him at the same time. It's strange. It's like someone you love to hate. He's tough, but at least he gets things done. So in a way, he's a good captain. Maybe he pushes everybody around a bit too much, so that's the flaw. Like he's unnecessarily aggressive toward people, it creates antagonism, so maybe he's not a very good captain. I don't know, it's an interesting analysis. And especially I liked how he prepared the ship for battle. Like he said, we're about to go to war with the Cardassians possibly, so we need to get the ship ready, so shut down all this science stuff and prepare the ship for battle. And that's the kind of stuff they should have been doing in other episodes when they were faced with a conflict. No one did what Jellicoe did here, so it kind of made me appreciate him in some ways. And meanwhile, Picard was being tortured by Gol Madred, who was a very fun villain. And there were some dark moments of Picard being tortured. Watching that as a kid was kind of traumatic, but also very important. They had to do that to really put the message across that torture is an evil thing to do. And also I loved all those little speeches Picard was giving, even while in this condition. He was still lecturing the Cardassian and why it's so wrong to torture people and stuff like that. And he kind of, there was like a mind game between them, and Picard kind of won that game in the end, even though it was by luck that he got rescued just before he kind of broke down. But until that very last moment, he was able to keep his dignity, not to give up his free will to that person, not to break, and even in some ways maybe break him a little bit, because he kind of psychoanalyzed him and kind of poked back at him. So that was fun. So a lot of great scenes in the episode. And so I think this two-parter is great, and I also love how they defeated the Cardassians in the end. And also Deep Space Nine started shortly after this, and so I wonder if all these events maybe led to Cardassians leaving Bajor, because the Federation put a lot of pressure on them after basically catching them by the balls with that fleet in the nebula, and started making demands of them if they want their fleet released. So maybe one of the demands was that they free Bajor. I wish they would have included that, and that would have made the Federation look much better, that they were able to pressure the Cardassians into leaving Bajor, because right after this, Deep Space Nine started, and they said that the Cardassians had just left Bajoran sector. So I wish they would have tied with this episode, and to say that it was thanks to Starfleet. That would have tied in nicely, in my opinion. Maybe we can assume it happened off screen. So the next episode is called Ship in a Bottle, and it's the return of Moriarty from season 2. He's a holodeck character who became sentient, and in the end of that episode, Elementary Dear Data, they promised him that they will try to find a way to free him from the holodeck, because he's a sentient being, and they basically put him in storage. And here he manages to resurface, and he's angry that they never released him, and he takes over the ship apparently. And then it turns out he actually created a simulation inside the simulation, so that anyone who comes into the holodeck and they think he left, he will actually stay in the holodeck, and there will be a simulation of the Enterprise inside it. And that was a very fun idea. It's like Inception, a holodeck inside the holodeck. That was a brilliant idea. And the Data was the one to figure it out, so he's like Sherlock Holmes, finding the clues, and is able to outsmart Moriarty, so that was great as well. It's like a continuation of that story in season 2, and Moriarty is a great villain in my opinion, because he's not totally evil. You can understand his side as well, and he's very cunning and clever and charismatic, and so I love Moriarty as a villain. I wish we had another sequel with his story, because in the end of the day he was still in the holodeck, only that he didn't know it. They tricked him as well to make him think he left the holodeck when he didn't really, and they basically kept him in storage. Maybe it would have been a good idea to have some kind of sequel story with him. We know that Barclay is the one who kept him in a small mobile box, and maybe when Barclay was in contact with Voyager, maybe he could have accidentally transferred Moriarty to Voyager. Maybe Moriarty would have stolen the Doctor's mobile emitter, and that way he could be free and stuff like that. They could have had Moriarty appear again. That would have been so much fun. I think I did that in one of my edits, and my edits were mostly for comedy, but also I used them to kind of express ideas I had as a kid, and so that idea I just explained about Moriarty, kind of another sequel to him, it's something I wanted to see. And so when I was creating kind of my own stories in recuts and edits, I inserted that idea into one of them, and that was a lot of fun. So anyway, back to the review. So I think Ship in a Bottle is a brilliant episode, one of the best ones of the season, and I love Moriarty as a villain, and it was great to see a sequel to that original episode in season 2. I'm glad they finished up that story in some way and they continued it, and so that's great. And the next episode is called Aquiel, which I think was heavily inspired by the movie The Thing, because in this episode there is an alien shapeshifter that turns into the people he consumes, and in the end it turns out that it became that dog that was in the episode all the time and that we were not supposed to notice. And it's again kind of like a mystery, and somewhere in the middle of the episode they figure out about that alien, and they thought that woman that Geordi falls in love with is the alien, and then it turns out to be the dog, which somehow no one suspected. Actually, I remember when I first watched this episode, I did suspect it right before it was revealed. I kind of guessed it, that I thought, how come no one is checking the dog? And only years later I saw that movie The Thing, which also started out with a dog being that alien before it becomes someone else. And so I think it's very likely this episode was inspired by that. So this episode had a lot of cool ideas, but I'm not sure I would say this is a good episode. I would say it's a below average episode, because most of it was kind of boring. Geordi was looking over at all those logs about that woman, and he kind of fell in love with her, and it always happens to Geordi. He always falls in love with some fake woman. One time it's a holographic woman, now it's someone's log that he's reading without permission, and then he meets the real woman, and it doesn't work. And so Geordi is kind of a loser with women, I guess. So he always falls in love with simulations and stuff. So anyway, this episode had a lot of good moments, but I would say overall it's a below average episode, nothing really amazing, and kind of a stolen idea. The only cool thing about this episode was ripped off from some other movie, and so that kind of makes it less original, and so it loses points for me. And the next episode is called Face of the Enemy, and once again it kind of begins with a mystery. Troy is suddenly a Romulan on a Romulan ship, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And then it's revealed she was somehow recruited to do something by that Romulan guy to rescue some people from the Romulus to the Federation. And why exactly did they need Troy for this? That kind of doesn't make much sense. But it's a fun episode. There was a lot of tension. All those scenes in which she's almost revealed, she has to improvise, and she then has to pretend to be in the Tal Shi'ar and all of that. And you know, Troy was like the most innocent character on the ship, and suddenly she has to pretend to be this evil, sadistic Tal Shi'ar officer and all that stuff. So that was kind of fun to see her in a totally different way than usual. That was fun. And then having her make contact with the Enterprise and threaten them, and then Picard has to play along not to expose her. That was a lot of fun. It kind of reminds me of the Scylla situation, just like that time in which they opened the channel and saw Scylla on the screen, and they were like, what is Tasha doing there as a Romulan? So here it's with Troy. And also that female captain of the Romulans was awesome. I think that was the same actress who was in the episode First Contact. So she's a great actress. There's a lot of very good tenseful moments. I think this episode was inspired by one of the TOS episodes in which Kirk pretended to be a Romulan to sneak on a Romulan ship to steal a cloaking device. And here it's Troy being a secret agent on the Romulan ship. So overall a very fun episode, also a glimpse into the Romulan culture and all of that, which we had way too little of. In fact, I think this is the only episode in which we kind of get to see things from the Romulan point of view. So that was interesting as well. So overall I would say this is an above average episode, kind of cool and interesting and tenseful and unusual, so that was a lot of fun. And the next episode is called Tapestry, which also I think is considered one of the best episodes. And I do think this is an example of an episode with a very strong lesson to it about life and all of that, because the message of the episode is basically that your mistakes in the past are not necessarily mistakes, that you can learn from your mistakes and you can become a better person thanks to them and stuff like that. Because the plot is that Picard regrets the way he was when he was younger, and after he nearly dies, Q brings him back in time and gives him an opportunity to change the past. And so Picard basically avoids getting injured in the heart by avoiding getting into the fight with the Nausicaans, and he has to kind of betray his friends to do it. And when he returns to the present, suddenly everything is different about him. He's no longer the captain, he's just a lieutenant, and he's a science officer. And it turns out that because he never experienced that event of almost dying, he never realized how precious life is, how important every moment is. Also, he became a timid person who always plays it safe, who never takes chances, never takes risks. And so he never got promoted to the rank of captain. And so in terms of an episode with a message, I think maybe this is the strongest one. Probably more so than The Inner Light, which is also considered one of the best episodes, probably for the same reason, because it has some kind of advice for life and stuff like that. This is the same kind of episode with a message, but I think this one is actually better than the one in Inner Light, because this one has Q, who is always fun. It also has a lot of funny moments. It has an interesting kind of time travel story, a parallel reality in which Picard is not the captain. That was interesting to see. So overall a very, very good episode. And the next episode is called Birthright Part 1, and it's the one in which the Enterprise visits Deep Space Nine. So I guess by this point the Deep Space Nine show is already running, and it's not the same event of Picard meeting Cisco in that episode in which you met him. This seems to be taking place after that, so that means Deep Space Nine was running for a while. And I guess the Enterprise was still somewhere close by that it was able to revisit Deep Space Nine again so quickly, because it couldn't have been more than a few episodes before that it started, because you know that episode in which O'Brien and Keiko are still on the ship, in the episode Rascals, and the Data discovers he has a dream program and he has all these visions and stuff. That was pretty neat. He meets his father in his dream and he looks like a young Brent Spiner, which is much better than Sung's previous appearance, in which I remember I complained that they put too much makeup on him, that you couldn't even tell that it's Brent Spiner. I remember when I watched that episode, I didn't even realize it was him the first time I watched it. And here it's him without any old man makeup, and so in a way it was much more fun to see Data as a human, kind of. That was a very nice visual. And also Worf finds out that his father might be alive, and so he goes looking for his father, and that is continued in part 2. That's only about that. And Worf doesn't find his father. Unfortunately, I think it would have been interesting he doesn't find his father, but he finds a colony of Romulans and Klingons living together, and then he tries to save the Klingons from that place, and he gets in conflict with the leader of that place, and he tells all those Klingons about their culture and all of that, and then they want to go with him, and so in a way he kind of destroyed that colony, which maybe is not a good idea. I mean, it was a pretty impressive accomplishment to have Klingons and Romulans living together in peace, and Worf kind of destroyed that, so was it really the best thing to do? And I think part 2 is a pretty weak episode. I thought part 1 of Birthright was a very good episode. Also, it was cool seeing Deep Space Nine and Dr. Bashir, and Data's dreams were fun. But part 2 is just about Worf with those Klingons, which I thought was a lot weaker. And the next episode is called Starship Mine, which it began as a very comedic episode. It had all those scenes with Commander Hutch, who is excellent at small talk, and Data tries to imitate him and all of that. That was a lot of fun. But then Picard goes back to the Enterprise to get his saddle, and then at the same time some terrorists try to steal some dangerous materials from the ship's engines, and he gets stuck on the ship with them, and then he has to fight them like Die Hard. He's all alone on the ship and has to defeat this group of terrorists, so I guess that was pretty fun. And also he beats up Tuvok with a Vulcan neck pinch, which is hilarious. And so overall I think it's a pretty good episode. And the next episode is called Lessons, which is about Picard falling in love with that woman who he plays music with, and there was nice attention to continuity when they showed that he still plays the flute, which he got in the Inner Light, and he told her the full story of how he got that flute and all of that. And the music itself was pretty good. All those scenes of them playing the music itself was very nice, very beautiful. By the way, there's an extended version of that song which is pretty nice. It's one of my favorite pieces of music, very lovely, and they made it very believable the way they fell in love. You could see their expressions and all of that. They're good actors, so you could really buy it that they're falling in love. But then in the end of the episode, Picard figures out that he's unable to serve on the same ship with her, because that means putting her in danger, and he's unable to do his job if he's with her, and so they split off. And that's another kind of missed opportunity. That's one of the things I dislike in the show, because it's so episodic. It always has to return exactly to the way everything were before, and so they never really do any kind of continuing story arcs, and I think it's too bad. I think it would have been nicer to have Picard be with her for at least a few episodes, and maybe a few episodes later have that event after which they break up. When it all happens in a single episode, it feels way too rushed. It feels as if they just met, they fell in love, and immediately broke off. It's kind of disappointing. I mean, I guess it makes the story condensed and not boring, not drawn out, but it would have felt a little bit better if we had kind of a window of time in between episodes that we could imagine Picard was happy for a while with a woman. It would have been more heartwarming to think that at least for a while he was with a woman he loves, and maybe only a few episodes later he would break off with her. But I guess maybe they didn't want to do it because they wanted to save money as well, but mostly it was because of that reasoning that they wanted to have every episode be its own story, so that the audience can tune in into any episode and know what's going on. But it was also a missed opportunity, because I think stories like that would have worked better if they were a little bit drawn out. Just like in Deep Space Nine, it worked a lot better when they had all kinds of relationships between crew members and stuff like that. It was a lot better in Deep Space Nine because they were able to carry stuff like that over to multiple episodes. And the Orville is also better in that regard. And I don't think it would have ruined it. I mean, it's not a big deal to show us in a future episode that he's with a woman. Like, we don't have to know the backstory. So an audience could have tuned in and understood everything, even if they didn't watch that previous episode about that woman. It would still have worked. And so I think the studios really messed things up by forcing the show to be so episodic, and that everything has to be reset exactly to normal in the end of each episode. So that's a minor flaw in the show. But at least it also prevented them from becoming into a total soap opera. It prevented them from drawing out stories too long, which today's shows do too much. Like Star Trek Discovery is way too much of a long stretch, like one long movie, which is also kind of annoying that they never finish any story. And so if I have to pick between that and this, I would rather pick the style of Star Trek TNG, because at least it was never boring. The story always came to a conclusion in the same episode most of the time, and it's better off than 10 episodes with the same story, in my opinion. So Lessons was a pretty decent episode. Nothing really major was happening, nothing epic, but it was nice for a change to see a simpler, calm story about the characters and stuff like that. So overall I enjoyed the episode. And the next episode is called The Chase, which is a pretty epic episode if you think about it, because this is the episode in which they reveal the reason why all the humanoid aliens look humanoid. It turns out there was an ancient humanoid species that seeded the whole galaxy with their DNA, and that led the evolution on all the planets, or at least on most of the planets, to become human-like. And it's all been revealed by archaeology with that guy who came to Picard seeking his help, and Picard couldn't leave the Enterprise, and so that guy, that professor, left the ship and then was killed by some Euridians, and then Picard did feel responsible for that and wanted to fulfill his mission, and there's like a chase against the clock to find all the clues, and the Cardassians are also looking for the same clues, and the Klingons, and then the Romulans show up in the end, and there's that epic scene in the end when all the major species are all in a face-off, and then Picard completes the program, and then they see the hologram of that ancient humanoid who looks kind of similar to that female founder in Deep Space Nine, and she tells them all about that ancient humanoid species. And the line that kills me is when she says, "We were hoping that you would have to work together in friendship and companionship to hear this message, and now that you are able to do it, that means you did." That's kind of very emotional, very optimistic, but it's kind of sad at the same time, because we know that they didn't come together in friendship, they came together in hostility, and it just happens to work out. But the intention was for all these species to be united in friendship, and that's the Star Trek message. That's why I really love that scene and that speech by that lady, and it was really great, really emotional, and really kind of the spirit of Star Trek, wanting to unite all the species in friendship. That's lovely. And then even that Romulan commander in the end, he talks with Picard and says that maybe we're not so different, maybe one day, and the episode kind of ends optimistically, so I love that. So overall, a very, very good episode, which explains one of the biggest kind of strange things about Star Trek. Why are all the aliens so similar? So I love it. I love the fact that we have an explanation, and I love the spirit of the episode. I love the mystery in the episode. I love that little personal story about Picard and his teacher and all of that. So overall, a very, very good episode. And the next one is called Frame of Mind, which also is a pretty good episode, and it's one of those in which you don't know what's going on, and you see everything from Riker's point of view, and you think maybe Riker is going crazy because he keeps appearing in that mental asylum, and once he's there, he thinks his life on the Enterprise is a fake one. It's a hallucination, and then he appears back on the Enterprise, and then vice versa, and then it happens again, and each time you don't know what's going on. And I remember the first time I saw it as a kid, I was really excited because I really didn't know, maybe the whole show will turn out to be fake, and all of that. I was really kind of on the edge of my seat watching that. I wouldn't react that way now as an adult. I would know that must end with everything back to normal, but when I saw it the first time as a kid, I didn't know that, so I was really kind of terrified by that episode, thinking, oh no, so the whole show wasn't real, it was all in Riker's mind, oh no. So it was really fun the first time, and I love all these weird episodes in which all kinds of strange stuff is happening and you don't know why. So this whole episode was like messing with your mind in a very creepy way. I love it when a story kind of messes with your mind. It also shows you how a crazy person might view reality, like if it's that way for crazy people, that they cannot tell what is real or not. It's really kind of fascinating, so it makes you understand that kind of a person, how he views everything. It reminds me of the movie Shutter Island, which also I think is an excellent movie. It also had a similar idea of the main character not knowing what is real or not, so that was a brilliant movie as well, and it's very similar to the idea in this episode, so I really like it. And the next episode is called Suspicions, and the hero of the episode is Dr. Crusher. And it's all about a murder mystery. Someone killed that alien, and she wants to figure out how and why. And then there's a twist in the end that the alien is not really dead. He faked his own death because he wanted to steal that technology, and Dr. Crusher stops him. So it was like an interesting kind of crime drama, kind of investigating stuff. And I guess it was nice to see Beverly being the main hero for a change in an episode. And that alien was cool and interesting, and yet something kind of feels a little bit boring about this episode. Nothing really amazing. I did like the twist in the end. I did like that alien's physiological abilities. That was neat, and I love the idea of that technology that enables them to go into stars and all of that. But somehow this episode still feels kind of weak, so I would say this is just an average episode, because there was nothing really amazing about that. Another interesting thing in it is that they had a Ferengi scientist who seems to be not the typical Ferengi. And maybe by this point in the series they realized what they did with the Ferengi, because they kind of made them into a stereotypical, almost racist kind of idea, the way they treated the Ferengi. Always all the Ferengi were the same. They were all greedy, they were all bad, they were all despicable, and suddenly they introduced this character of a good Ferengi, apparently, a Ferengi scientist, to kind of break that stigma which they created, that stereotype. And so I like the fact that they try to show that there's a variety of different people in any species, any culture, and so I love the fact that they had a good Ferengi for a change. But still, I would rank this as just an average episode, nothing really great about it. And the next episode is called Rightful Heir, which is about Worf having a religious crisis. And it's kind of strange because we never really got the sense that Worf is a religious person. And now apparently he believes in Kahless as if he's a real deity and stuff. And he goes looking for him and he meditates, and then he sees Kahless reappearing. And then that becomes the story, that did the real Kahless really return from the dead? Is he like the second coming of Jesus for the Klingons? And so there's like a debate going on, and Gowron is like the skeptic atheist who doesn't believe it. Of course, he has a personal reason not to believe, because he doesn't want to give up his rule to this potential imposter, and so he's been very skeptical toward him, not wanting to believe he's the real Kahless. And in the end, it turns out that he's a clone of Kahless. But that still begs the question, maybe that is the way that Kahless was meant to return. I mean, in a way, he is Kahless, so maybe that is the way he was supposed to return, and so it still can be said to fulfill the prophecy and all of that. This whole idea, I guess, is like a metaphor to Jesus, the way that religious people believe that he will come back. And maybe if it was possible to somehow clone Jesus, what would happen in such a situation? Would people accept him as the same person or not? And so this is kind of a neat science fiction religious idea to explore, and so I like that. And it was overall a fun episode, and also some more insight into Klingon culture and religion and all of that. So it's just above average, but not great. And the next episode is called Second Chances, and this is a very, very interesting episode in which they find a replica of Riker on some planet from which he was supposed to be beamed out 12 years ago. And apparently the transporter had a malfunction and it left a copy of Riker on that planet. And so we have two Rikers existing simultaneously. And I love how that other Riker on the planet, he wears the old style uniform from the first seasons. You know, they replaced those uniforms mostly because the actors were complaining that they were uncomfortable. That's why they replaced all the uniforms in season 3. And I think that was an unintended, brilliant thing the show did, because anytime they want to show someone from the past, from a few years before, all they have to do is show him in that old style uniform, and that way we can visually know that person is from the past, by seeing him in that old style uniform which we know from a few years ago in the first season. And so it's kind of a brilliant way to show someone is from the past just by showing his uniform. And so I love the fact that we see him in that old style uniform. And because back then he was still in a relationship with Troy, so while he was on that planet, he was still in love with Troy, and he was painting stuff for her, and he was only dreaming about meeting her again. And once he sees her on the Enterprise, he's so full of joy, he so much wants to be with her, but then he realizes, oh no, you're here because of that other Riker. And then she has to tell him that no, we actually broke up, we're not together anymore, but he still wants to be with her because in his mind they never broke up. And so it's a very interesting kind of situation, and the Orville imitated this idea as well in one episode, because Ed Mercer and Kelly were together in the past, and then the Kelly from the past appears in the future, and from her point of view they never broke up. But after she finds out that they break up in the end, then she decides maybe not to be with him. And so they kind of stole that idea from this episode in which we have two Rikers, and one of them is still in love with Troy, still wants to be with her, and then she has to decide what to do. I mean, she knows that it doesn't work out between them, and because of that she doesn't want to go into all of this again. She doesn't want to get into a relationship which she knows already wouldn't work. And so this is a very interesting dynamic between all these characters, and the two Rikers hate each other and all of that, so it was very funny. But I think this episode also had a very big missed opportunity, because they never really discuss the metaphysical ramifications of what happened, because in all previous episodes we never knew that the transporter is actually able to create copies of people. We assumed it was never really possible, and therefore it was never really a big issue in the shows that question, is the transporter only making copies of you, or is it actually you who appears in the other place? But after this episode it kind of confirms that the transporter is actually making a copy of you, so it destroys the old copy and creates a new one. So what does that mean for using the transporter? From that episode on, they should have been more timid about using that, because they know that if it can replicate people, then maybe every time you transport, it simply makes a copy of you. And so it's kind of disappointing that they never really addressed this topic in this episode or in any other episode in the whole show. They never once addressed this issue of the transporter being basically a killing machine that only makes copies of people. And also technically they should be able to use it as an immortality machine, because if you can make endless copy of yourself, then anytime anyone dies on an away mission, they can simply create his last copy that was backed up from the last time he transported. So in a way it should be an immortality machine, but I guess that would make them all overpowered, and so that's why they don't want to explore that idea. But this episode was an opportunity to at least touch on this topic a little bit, and they didn't really, so that was disappointing. And they never really discussed that whole topic in the whole show. I guess they couldn't really discuss it because that would ruin the whole idea of the transporter. And you know, earlier in this season we had that episode when Barkley was being afraid to transport, and he never raised this issue either. Maybe that's where they should have done it. They should have made Barkley say it, that the transporter kills you and makes a copy of you, and that's why he doesn't want to be transported. Instead, they made him say that he was simply scared on a technical level of the fact that maybe something will break down and he won't reappear and stuff like that. But I would have made it that he's afraid because of that metaphysical ramification of being broken down and basically dying, and then a copy of you is created. That I think would be a much more interesting topic to talk about. But also in that episode when we saw him being transported, we saw it happens kind of smoothly and he never actually loses consciousness. And so maybe that way people always feel like they're themselves, because there is no moment in which you lose consciousness and then wake up again. And therefore the consciousness kind of stays intact all the way through. And that seems to indicate that you are still the same person. But here with Riker, we have now two Rikers who are both Riker. And so what does that mean? So I guess it is a copy of him. Both of them are copies of the original Riker that got transported on the way down when he was broken up. But I guess after so many times you got transported, then it no longer matters, because you're a copy of a copy of a copy a million times, and from your point of view you're always the real one, so why would you be scared to do it again? And there was a very good movie that explored this whole idea, which was called The Prestige, which was about magicians. It was a Christopher Nolan movie, and it's a little bit of a spoiler, but they had something like a transporter, and they really explored that question that I was just talking about in that movie. So that's probably the best example of that idea being explored in any movie or show. So check out the movie The Prestige if you didn't see it. I highly recommend it. So what do I think about this episode? It's a pretty good one, and finally they did something with Riker and Troy, because they always tease us with them, they always talk about how they used to be together, but they don't really do a lot with them. And in this episode they finally kind of explore their relationship and they do something with it, and they add this interesting triangle into all of that with this science fiction idea, so this is fun. So overall a very good episode in my opinion. Also this other Riker appeared later in Deep Space Nine, which was also interesting, and they made him kind of into a more evil version of Riker, I guess. I guess it's possible because he lived such a bad life for 12 years on that planet all alone. Maybe that could explain why he has a different personality and he's not that nice as our Riker is. So anyway, a good episode overall. And the next one is called Timescape, which was also a very fun episode. It begins with Picard, Data, Troy and Geordi on a runabout, going back to the Enterprise, and then they see the Enterprise became frozen in time together with a Romulan ship, and then they devise a way to protect themselves from the other time frame, and they come on board the Enterprise on which everything is frozen in time, and they're able to move all around it. And that's a very fun idea. That's an idea that was done in a lot of different science fiction movies, and it's always fun, even though it's not really that realistic if you really think about it scientifically. And remember, I made a whole video trying to explain it away with Technobabble, how it could be possible thanks to those devices they were wearing and all of that, and the force field around them that I guess also provides everything to them, like the proper atmosphere and temperature and lighting and all of that, because otherwise they wouldn't really be able to function normally if everything is frozen in time except for them. But it works because they have these Technobabble devices. And so you need to just kind of accept it and roll with it, and then it becomes a very fun episode about people that are basically moving very fast like the Flash, and everything else is moving super slow. And that's a very nice idea in my opinion. I always love this idea. This is something that even before I saw this episode and these kinds of movies, this is an idea I had as a kid. I remember I was imagining stuff like that. What if I could freeze everybody and walk around without anyone seeing me? How fun would that be? So I always kind of loved that idea. And so I love that episode, and there's a lot of funny moments as well, especially that moment when Picard puts a smile on that warp core bridge. That was hilarious. The first time I saw that, I really cracked up because it was so unexpected, it was so bizarre. So that was fun. And also this is a mystery episode in which you don't know what's going on, why is things happening like that, what the hell happened. And that was a lot of fun the first time you watch it. And so I think it's a very good episode. And the next episode is the season final called Descent, in which they meet the Borg again, only the Borg apparently changed because of what happened with Hugh previously. The Borg became more like individuals, and the Lore took over the Borg, and he gave some emotions to Data, which also made Data evil. And so in the end of the episode, Data joins Lore, and they say they want to destroy the Federation with the Borg, and so that's kind of an epic idea. And I'll discuss it in length in my next review, when I review the final season of TNG in my next video. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and we can discuss it, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.